Early Breakfast with Rosie Wright on Times Radio with MHR, the HR, payroll and finance software empowering your team. Find out more at mhrglobal.com.
You've got these very dramatic photographs of the fire out at the North Sea on the front pages of most of the papers after that oil tanker and cargo ship collided yesterday morning. It was about shortly after 10 o'clock. After 5:30, we're going to be speaking to a marine accident investigator to try and work out exactly what went wrong. You can see emergency services working to try and put out, at least initially, at the flames. The Guardian's lead story, though, is those words from the Prime Minister yesterday saying the number of jobless in the UK is indefensible amid some heavy criticism that he's been getting over those proposed cuts to the welfare budget. The Times puts it as an eco-disaster fears after those ships collide in the North Sea. The toxic chemicals that have been spilt and that are now burning are threatening rare habitats. There's also a picture of the Princess of Wales arriving for the Commonwealth Day service at Westminster Abbey yesterday. She looks sort of very radiant in red. The Daily Telegraph put it as the Princess in pearls. There's a very large photograph of her on the front page. But their lead story, farmers being forced to sell fields for less than their potential value if they're seized to build new homes or hospitals under measures in the government's planning and infrastructure bill. We learned a bit more about that yesterday. Well, here to go through the papers in more detail is Andrew Eborn, the barrister and broadcaster. Andrew, good morning.
Good morning, Rosie. Always a delight to join you.
I believe talking to us from the south of France this morning to make us all feel very envious.
I tell you what, the weather in the UK is much, much nicer. It's been torrential rain here.
Well, it was lovely until yesterday, and then it was miserable again. The first thing I want to talk to you about is this big sentencing review. Now, last week, it emerged that the body that advised the government and set the sentencing guidelines had said, look, to judges, they should look at sort of the ethnic minorities of the people they're sentencing in terms of giving the sentences. Now, the Justice Secretary, we were told, was incandescent this had happened. But the latest, the Sentencing Council has rejected demands by the Justice Secretary to reverse those controversial set of guidelines that they issued. What's happened?
So what's happening is they're basically saying the judges have to take into account ethnic, cultural or religious minorities when working out the sentencing. And I always say that trust comes in on foot but leaves on horseback. And the general principle about sentencing is that justice should be blind. Everybody's supposed to be viewed the same in the law. But they take into account various considerations with the person who's been convicted of the crime. And there are three aspects to sentencing. One is the punishment for the person. The other is the deterrent, so they don't do it again. And the other is about the rehabilitation. And what they're saying is that people from ethnic and cultural and religious minorities, the sentencing outcome is inconsistent with those who are not within those groups. And so what's happening is they're turning around and say, well, they should take this into consideration. Now, obviously, everybody's crying out about two-tier justice system, which is why there's this big conflict. But that's what's supposed to happen. And the sentencing guidelines, it's supposed to be like a scientific tariff, if you like, is that anybody looking at it will turn around and reach the same decision. And they have a sort of benchmark, if you like, for any particular crime. And there are factors, what are called aggravating factors, which mean you get a bit more than the usual sentence, or mitigating factors, which are a bit less. And the whole justice system basically tried to be more transparent, not just being done, but seen to be done. And you might recall that on the 28th of July 2022, we had the very first ever televised sentencing by Sarah Munro of Ben Oliver.
The challenge is the Justice Secretary, particularly hearing those accusations of there being this sort of two-tier justice system, and we know that there's particular sensitivities. Other people have perhaps often in the past unfairly called the Prime Minister of being, two-tier keir, so they're very conscious to avoid any connotations there. Lord Justice William Davis, chairman of the council, warned the Justice Secretary that sentencing guidance must not be dictated to judges by ministers. So there's a bit of a row brewing. I mean, both of them are going to meet for talks about the new guidance on Thursday, but the sentencing body are kind of saying, you can be upset as you like, but you can't tell us what to do.
And that's right. And it's about the independence of the judiciary. What they actually say is in criminal proceedings where the offender is the subject of a prosecution by the state should not determine the sentence imposed on an individual offender. So they're trying to keep their independence. They're working on that basis. The political problems, as we say, about this two-tier accusation will continue in the media, and media will burst a blood vessel on this sort of basis because they're saying, look, this is completely wrong and has caused all sorts of problems. What they're saying, they're taking legal advice at the moment. It's what's called the Coroners and Justice Act of 2009, asking for guidelines to be revised and say that might be applied. The body's next meeting, as you say, in the next few days, it's going to be interesting to see how that all pans out.
Now, the paper asked the question this morning, talking about the civil service. We know that the Conservative government tried over the last 8 years to say they would reduce the size of the civil service, and actually increased it in size every year. Why, asked the Times, despite decades of promises of reform, do the same problems persist? Where would you see as the problems in the civil service?
Well, I think that they say, basically, there's no leader. There's nobody who's actually taking control and saying, this is what has to happen. When we look over the states and the delights that a lot of those of his supporters, Donald Trump, and the Doge, and basically looking at Department of Government efficiency, you would think that we may well benefit from a similar sort of, the British Doge, if you like, to have a look at that sort of side. But basically, it's not more productive. And we need to look at the reasons for that. The brilliant article in the Times says it's because there's no clear leader. But we need to look at other inefficiencies and so on and so forth. And until those inefficiencies have been dealt with, then there continue to be those problems. And the other thing is, I often advocate about artificial intelligence and increasing efficiencies. A lot of the routine, mundane jobs, processing certain things, could be greatly improved as a result of using more and more artificial intelligence.
I think what causes a bit of nervousness, and we're going to talk about this in the business news, is significant job cuts. It looks like about 7,000 jobs are going to be gone at NHS England, and what the repercussions might be. Wes Streeting's certainly taking a different strategy to how to run the National Health Service. And, there's clearly going to be an impact felt when suddenly 7,000 people are out of the workforce. So we'll have an update on that in about half an hour's time. Now, the TV archaeologist, this is Alice Roberts, her words and her interview's been written up in the Times today. She's talking about the long debate over what should happen to the Parthenon sculptures, the Elgin marbles. She has said the English would be pretty upset if another country had parts of Stonehenge. So she says the Elgin marbles should be returned to Greece. Do you think it's a fair comparison?
Well, it's a debate which has been going on forever. What's happened is the claim, they're called the Lord Elgin, named after the Elgin marbles. People otherwise call them the Parthenon marbles. He took them between 1801 and 1812. Those who argue that they should be returned say it was done under questionable legal authority. The Ottoman Empire, which ruled Greece at the time, granted him permission, but some argue this was an abuse of power over an occupied side. Those who argue in favour of retaining them basically say, no, well, it was all about preservation. We needed to have it over here, otherwise they could have been destroyed as a result. So the debate will carry on raging. Legally, I think that we're entitled to collect them and retain them, rather, and preserve them, which is what we've done for a long time.
You would feel pretty miffed, though, if another country had part of Stonehenge.
Oh, no, absolutely. And that's a very, very good point. But you have to look at the historical context. And the historical context says that it was properly acquired at the time. Those are what the laws were saying. If they hadn't been preserved in this way, then they could have been destroyed. But you're right, it does open the floodgates. And it's a very legitimate comparison, if you like, to say, well, we wouldn't like, although we did sell London Bridge because people thought it was Tower Bridge, you work on that principle. But if you then open it up and have a look and say, well, OK, let's look at museums around the world. Is that the right time to look at these things? I always say keep an open mind, keep the debate going, but it is that balance. It's the balance between the legally entitled to take it in the first place and what's the right way of doing it. The circumstances for the acquisition are in debate, but those who say we should retain them basically say it was about preservation, and those who are against it say it was about an abuse at the time.
I've got one more legal story for you, Andrew. This is going to spark debate, I am sure. If you are given, as a senior member of staff, a low-status desk in the office, maybe you're sort of just told to hot desk like someone else, you can sue. What's happened?
Well, absolutely. And to the estate agent, talking about low status. Well, I'll tell you what. So this is what happened.
Quite an assertion, Andrew.
Oh, no, terrible. I love estate agents. But we all love estate agents, don't we? He quit after being denied a symbolically significant seat because he felt that all his colleagues would be looking at him thinking, well, he must be sort of lower or middle management because his desk is in the wrong place. And this is what the tribunal upheld this. They understand that he would be a bit miffed about it and people would be looking at it accordingly. It was a hearing held in Watford, and they heard that Walker was his name, was branch manager at Robson's in Rickmansworth from 2017. In 2023, he was moved to the nearby Chorley Wood branch, but in May 2023, he was asked to move back because his replacement there had resigned. He basically got this practical and symbolic significance. It was the wrong desk in the wrong place.
I think in the office, he wanted to sit at the very back of the room, and then presumably you've got more privacy there as well. And then he was told you've got to sit in the middle, where I guess lots of people can see what your computer screen is doing. It's where the more junior employees sat, and he thought, do you know what, I'm not standing for this. And anyway, he's managed to sue. Do you think this is going to cause a whole new load of office arguments, Andrew, as people pitch for a better location in the office?
I think the phrase symbolically significant is going to be bandied around for a long time. But the reason they sit so far into the office is protection, because in the old days when people, you basically had to fight off all the lower management and the lower employees before getting to the big boss who was well protected right at the very, very back. So there were all sorts of reasons for that. But no, it's symbolically significant. He viewed it as a slight argument, and obviously the tribunal found in his favour.
Also, I think if you're a younger or you're just starting your career, you don't really want the boss sitting right next to you while you're doing your work. You like to sort of get on with it and then have a chance a little bit later to show what you're about. Andrew, thank you very much. Andrew Eborn, the barrister and broadcaster, going through the papers with me this morning.
Across the UK, on DAB, online and on your smart speaker. This is Times Radio.